So hi, I'm Zev. I look like this on the internet. Um, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this app. I just have one slide uh, just to have all the things on the screen at the same time. I have lost the share. Wait, I have found it again. There we go. So my name is Zev. I work at Race Labs, which was actually acquired recently by Rightpoint, but we're an agency, primarily mobile agency. So I get to work on pretty cool apps for sort of 6 to 9 months at a time. So I work on iOS full time here. And a couple years ago, we worked on this really cool and unique project called Blindways. So let's go back to stop share. So the project was a deal through the Perkins School for the Blind, which is an institution here in the Boston area that helps blind people. And they got a grant through google.org, which is like a sort of philanthropy arm of Google that was putting a lot of money towards research about public transit and accessibility. And so they got this grant and hired us to use the money to try and solve some problem. It was a pretty open-ended problem. And so part of what we did was just figuring out what we could do to help. And we were thinking about buses and trains and other form of public transit. And we looked at a lot of like computer vision kind of stuff, but this was sort of 3-ish years ago, and computer vision and AI on mobile devices was not nearly where it is now. There's been very rapid progress in the last couple of years. I think now we might realistically try to do something with, trying to read signs, that kind of thing. But at the time, that wasn't really practical. And so we came up with a solution that we really tried to narrow down and focus on one small piece of the problem that we could solve well. And what we arrived at was phones are pretty great for blind people for navigation because you can use GPS and they can read directions to you, and it's pretty amazing for wayfinding. But GPS is not super duper precise, and that is really important when you're trying to catch a bus, because if you're 20, 30 feet away from the actual sign, the pole with the sign on it, the bus driver won't see you and they'll drive right by. So that was a big pain point for a lot of the blind community here in Boston. And so we tried to figure out if we could solve that problem. Can we get you that last 20 or 30 feet? And what we came up with was actually a fairly low-tech solution. It's an app, it's a website, there's technology, but it's not using any of the sort of fancy machine learning stuff that you might expect to hear on a project like this. It's crowdsourced data. So we made an app that is useful to sighted users. It can tell you when the bus is arriving, which is pretty useful to know if you're standing at a bus stop. How long do I have to wait here? And then while you're in the app, you can submit clues to describe the area around the bus stop. And then blind people can use that information in the app in an accessible way that I'll show you to navigate around the bus stop. So I'll give you a quick demo. We'll see if this works. So here is the app. I'm showing it on the screen rather than like plugging in my phone, because how you actually physically interact with it is kind of important. So it's not going to be as visible as possible, but hopefully this will give you a good sense of what it is. So here's the app. It shows me a couple of bus stops nearby. I can also see stops that I've saved. And I'm going to tap on one of these nearby bus stops, and we can see that I'm near the stop. There's no upcoming bus arrivals, but if there were buses upcoming, it would say, the next bus on the 92 route is 3 minutes away, that kind of thing. And then down here, we have a set of clues for what is around the bus stop. And these are not particularly useful to a sighted user, but let me show you what happens when we use it as a blind person would use it. So iOS has this technology called VoiceOver, It's a screen reader. I believe it was introduced in 2009, and it allows people with visual impairments to use the device even though it's a touch screen and you don't get any tactile feedback. So I'm going to turn on VoiceOver here. It's just a shortcut to turn it on.
VoiceOver on. Lineways. Routes 92, 93.
So what we've got here is the phone is reading what's on the screen, and I don't know if you can see it. There's this cursor, this sort of black rectangle around the thing on the screen. And if I swipe anywhere on the screen, left and right, it's going to move that cursor.
No upcoming bus arrivals. Check back later. Current location, you are within 500 feet. GPS accuracy is bad. Approaching the stop with the street on your left. Double tap to change direction. Button. Heading.
So if I double tap anywhere on the screen, it does the action, whatever's under that rectangle.
Approaching the stop with the street on your right. Double tap to change direction. 1. Before the stop, there is an intersection. 2. Closer to the stop, there is an intersection. 3. The bus stop sign is on the thin square pole, along the curb. There are big columns behind the bus stop.
Question from the chat, can you speed up the text? Yes, and in fact, when you hear somebody who uses this full time, it's going to sound more like this. Let's see.
Headings, words, characters. 3. The containers. Speaking rate.
There it is.
60, 70%, 75, 80%. 4. Beyond the stop. Or no landmarks or seat. 5. 5. 4. Beyond the stop. Or no landmarks or seat.
So it sounds like unrealistically fast, but in fact, just having worked on this and been living in this for a couple months, I didn't use it at 90%, but I would use it at like maybe 75 and forget that it sounded fast. You totally get used to it.
4. Beyond
Slow it back down.
4. Beyond the stop. Speaking rate.
If you're looking into, if you're playing with VoiceOver, because it's fun to play with on your phone, if you spin your fingers, you get this thing called a rotor.
Audio ducking. 4. Beyond the stop. Containers. Speaking rate. 85%. From blue. Audio ducking. 70%.
You can also get drunk Siri.
60%. 55%. 40%. 30%. 20%.
It's kind of fun.
Delete glue. 35. 40. Delete glue.
Get it back up to 50.
50%. Delete glue.
Okay, that's more comfortable. So anyway, so that's the gist of how the app works.
Alert. Accessibility.
So
VoiceOver off.
fairly simple as apps go. Like it's a list of stuff. You can tap on the stuff and see more stuff. That's sort of the bread and butter of an app developer. So a lot of the complexity and challenges on this one really came down to what things do we add to the app and where do we put them in a way that a sighted person can understand and we can guide them through adding useful information and then display that information in a way that a blind person can consume. So you've seen how the consumption works. Let me show you. I have a couple of slides that one of our product managers did who previously gave a presentation on this. Let's see. Here we go. So we talked about some of the mock-ups that we did, and we did a lot of testing to figure out what was going to be useful. And we tried things like having a map of the street on the screen so that you would, as you run your finger over the screen, you would sort of build up a mental model. And we tried presenting the clues in order, and that's what we ultimately ended up going with after doing this testing. And so much of software design is, really any kind of design, is getting over the humps of figuring out what your users or your audience's mental model is and finding the stuff that you didn't realize that ends up surprising you. So many times you build the simplest app and you put it in somebody's hands and they use it in a way that you could not have anticipated. And it really is, it can be disheartening the first couple times it happens because you realize how little you understand about how other people think. But you really just have to get to expect it. Like you're going to hand your app to somebody and they're going to say, what does that button do? And you say, well, that's not a button. Or like, it's so out of left field that you can't hope to predict this kind of thing. But that's why it's important your app's in people's hands early. So one really interesting thing that we found, and I don't have the video, but Eric is going to link you to another presentation that our product manager did a few years ago about this project, and he shows the video, and I recommend checking it out. We did some testing with some visually impaired and blind users, and they weren't it seemed like they weren't quite getting it, and it took us a long time to figure out why. And we have this clip where this fellow is testing out the app. He's swiping through the clues, and the app says, to the left of the bus stop, there's a driveway. And he says, I don't understand. What does that mean? How could there be a driveway to the left of the bus stop? And you think, well, isn't it obvious? Why is that confusing? And it took us a long time to figure out that we'd been thinking about bus stops as this, like you're standing maybe on the sidewalk, looking past the bus stop to the street, and you see all the elements along the sidewalk as things in a line out in front of you. So there's a bench, then there's the sign, then there's a trash can. But a lot of our blind users were walking down the street towards the bus stop and encountering these obstacles, these objects on the sidewalk, one at a time in a line going forward. So to them, to the left of the bus stop was the street, and to the right was the row of houses, or vice versa if they're going the other way down the street. So they were encountering these things more one at a time in this dimension instead. Oh, I don't know if you can see me while you're seeing the slides. Anyway, forward, backward instead of left, right. And so after we realized that, we realized, oh, it's a good thing we caught this, because we were about to ship something that was not going to be usable at all because it didn't match up with our users' expectations. And we did a few more rounds of prototyping, not even building a real app. We would just hand them a phone that was powered off, and they would swipe on the screen, and somebody who knew how VoiceOver worked would just talk as Siri. And that's totally valid for testing, for validating ideas. So let me show you, try and jockey the things around a little bit. I will put my phone up on the screen. Show you what the editing interface is like, because this is also a kind of interesting aspect of this. So now we know how to present this data to the users. And we did a bunch of fun mock-ups. One of our designers built a bus stop and a sidewalk in our cafeteria in the office. Like, he just took chairs and things and put labels like, this is a bench, this is a fire hydrant, and then it asked us to come in and sort of feel our way around and figure stuff out. So we had to figure out, how can we guide sighted users through entering clues in a way that will be useful? Do we just put a text field? Do we, like, what kind of form do we have people fill out? So here's what we ended up with. I'm going to tap on the little dot, dot, dot button to edit one of these clues. This is also the same experience you would have if you were filling out clues for a new bus stop, but the ones near the office obviously have clues already filled in. So I can hit edit clue here, and I'm going to not say that I'm at the sign because I don't want to submit invalid GPS information. We also collect GPS information to make sure that the stop is where the data says it is, because some of MBTA's surveys aren't exactly accurate. And in fact, now some of the MBTA surveyors, when they're going out and checking sign placement, will bring our app with them to confirm placement. So what we have here is this fun little sort of wizard where normally you wouldn't have those check marks when you first start off with an empty bus stop. And I can tap on these check marks, and these are effectively sidewalk tiles. See, they've got kind of a perspective effect. And for each one, we have to answer this question. So every bus stop is unique. Please tell us about the bus stop sign. And the questions we ask are worded in a way that will make these useful to people who are navigating with their hands or with a blind cane. So for example, at one point we had a U-shaped pole, because, you know, those metal poles that are like the cross section is U-shaped. U-shaped isn't really a useful descriptor to somebody who doesn't use their eyes to navigate. So we changed it to thin pole open on one side, is what you or I might call a U-shaped pole. So we've got thin pole, thick pole, we have materials like metal and concrete, or the sign is on a building, or there's no sign. And then other is where you can enter text, and we try to guide the user through like what type of wording to use to make it make sense when it's read back in the app. But the text is really a last resort thing, because we want people to enter these known landmark types, because these are the ones that we identified through testing as being useful for navigation. And then we also have options down here for whether it's on grass or dirt, and whether it's set back from the curb. We fiddled a lot with that wording, 5+ feet away from the curb. Is it set back? Is it in? Is it to the right, to the left? So a lot of fiddling with the wording to get it just right. So you fill these in for the sign itself and 2 clues to either side. So on the other clues, we have more options for bike racks, fire hydrants, poles, utility boxes, no landmarks if there's just an open space. So you can go through, and we also have a little picture up at the top to kind of reinforce, here's the orientation you're supposed to be in, here's where the bus pulls up. So you can kind of get a sense of the scale and a sense of where you're supposed to be. I'm just going to discard those changes. And then those are the clues that then end up in the clue list here. And there's like favoriting, and there's the save stop thing. There's some settings, boring app stuff, the stuff that gets between the main idea and actually shipping the app. You have to build all the other stuff too. But that's the kind of basic shape of the app. I'm going to catch up on the chat, see if there's any. Oh, okay, we're collecting questions. I guess this would be a good place to see if there are any questions.
Okay, we do actually have our first question, which is, what motivated you to do this, and what keeps you motivated to maintain it and keep it as an app?
The primary thing that motivated us was that the Perkins School for the Blind was looking for an app developer, and that happens to be what we do. So that worked out nicely, but we always love projects like this that are, like, we get a lot of sort of e-commerce or businessy kind of things, and those are good, and those do help people and they pay the bills. But every once in a while we get a project that's like really helping people, and like that's its primary goal. And people around here get really excited about those. Those are a lot of fun to work on. They're really easy to stay motivated on, even through the frustrating parts of app development. And also really easy to stay motivated to go the extra mile. For example, in this app, we noticed an issue when we were testing where they use a lot of abbreviations in the MBTA data for all the bus stop names. So things like Hyde Park Avenue opposite Mount Hope Street. The word opposite is abbreviated as OP, O-P-P. The problem is when Siri reads that, it sounds an awful lot like at. And Hyde Park Avenue at Mount Hope Street is not the same thing as Hyde Park Avenue up Mount Hope Street. In fact, those are 2 different bus stops facing the other direction. And, if this were any other project, it would be like, yep, that's a problem. Let's put it in our backlog of issues and maybe we'll get to it. But it was the kind of thing on this project where that little difference could make the difference between a usable app and not. So we sat down and thought, well, okay, we have all these words, they're ambiguous. The voiceover thing doesn't read them right. So we put together a little bit of code that looks through, we dumped out all the words in all the bus stops and figured out which ones were common, and figured out which ones were abbreviations, and wrote some code to go through and audit all the words that it reads out for those common abbreviations and replace them with the full-length versions of the words, so that the voice version reads it full length, but it displays the abbreviated version in most cases.
That is really neat. Continuing with Just Paul's question, what would make things easier for those who use your apps? For example, please excuse me, I'll turn that off. For example, and I just messed up this. Okay. Smartphone subsidies, or would they need specialized smartphones to give them more abilities? What kind of support would be available?
So I think You have two different kinds of phones. I think in terms of the hardware and the operating system, we're in pretty good shape with iOS. Android has a lot of this stuff too. There's a feature in Android called TalkBack that works very similarly. I think iOS had a couple years head start, and a lot of the accessibility community has kind of gravitated around iOS. But whichever platform you're on, there's a lot of good technology there for the accessibility portions. In terms of what other things could be done to make like this problem easier, we're actually looking into some of those. We have done some trial projects, so that this one project is done, and actually part of the grant stipulated that it had to be open source, so you can see the source code of this. I will post it in the chat. I believe it is at github.com/Perkins Vision. So you can check out the iOS source code, which is cool. Like that is another motivating thing that we got to work on something that was going to go out in the public as source code, which doesn't usually happen. So that was exciting. With the original question, so we've done some trials with Bluetooth beacons. So these are small devices. It's a battery and a little bit of circuitry and an antenna and a sort of an ice cube size thing. And it broadcasts a signal. It just says, here I am. And you can figure out, not perfectly, but a little bit, you can figure out your signal strength and figure out roughly how far away you are from it. And so we've done some continuing kind of trial programs with the MBTA and with Perkins and with some other companies looking at stuff in this space around populating all the bus stops with beacons. So if you're in Boston and you go along, I believe it's the 70 and the 71 lines, you will see a bunch of these little white things stuck to the bus stop sign poles with like metal zip ties up and down those routes. And that was from a trial program we did where we got these beacons, we built a little app to configure them, and then we sent our coworkers out on the town to go and annotate, to tie them to the bus stop signs, and then open this app and log that this beacon coincides with this GPS location. And there was a lot more testing there. You can't just put the beacons on and pop them up in the app and call it a day. We had to do a lot of figuring out, like, well, how high do we put them? Where do we put them on the pole? It turns out that a wooden or concrete pole is thick enough usually to block the signal from this little low power beacon that has a battery that lasts for 2 years in the Boston winter. So we had to put two beacons, one on each side of the pole. And then how do you present that in the app? You can't show the raw Bluetooth signal strength, the RSSI. It's just not very useful. So we have to do a lot of smoothing to the data, and then we basically play hot and cold with the user, where we vibrate the phone faster the closer you're getting, and it's kind of approximate, but we did a bunch of testing approaching from both sides. How accurate is this? And we're now involved in another project related to beacons and entering and leaving train stations to figure out, like, which door did you go in? If you go out a door, this is actually a really common one. If you're in a train station, there might be 5 or 6 exits. How do you know which street you came out on if you go out an exit? So we're working on some stuff related to that. So I think beacons and probably some of the AI stuff I mentioned earlier in terms of machine learning and reading both computer tags like QR codes and beacons, but also just computer vision stuff. I think especially when AR glasses that we all know are coming happen in 5 years or so, being able to look at the sign, because the branding at these train stations is usually pretty consistent. So you can identify an official subway company sign with their font and their colors, and then figure out the information you need as long as you can teach a computer how to read it. So I think there's a ton of really good opportunities. It just needs a little bit of money and commitment from people who are interested in exploring these problems.
We have another question from Vijay, and you did talk about taking words and avoiding abbreviations when speaking them out, but he would like to know about more safety measures to prevent intentional or otherwise bad or misleading data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so especially since this app, in terms of the timeline of when it was built, it was coming off the heels of a lot of sort of stories about misusing and abusing online systems. We definitely were thinking about that when we built it. There's a report clue thing in the app and a confirm clue. So if somebody has entered, first of all, we guide users away from direct text entry. So it's not impossible to enter whatever text you want, but we do guide people away from that, so it's less likely. But then you can report a clue if somebody has put something either wrong or abusive. And then you can also confirm a clue, which lets the system figure out, like, this clue is more likely to be correct. It's verified. And in the future, if a lot of this depends on getting a kind of critical mass of users that it's worth putting a lot of time into updating features, you could do more in terms of sort of aggregating that data to figure out these clues are more likely to be true. And the clues also change. Like, a trash can might seem permanent, but then somebody will move it, kind of thing. So it's useful to be able to change and update the clues. So I think yes, we have some sort of reporting features, but it's a lot like Wikipedia in that anybody can go in and edit a clue. And it's mostly relying on kind of collective goodwill towards keeping the data good. And, if it gets bad, there are some relatively easy things that can be done to mitigate some of that, but it hasn't really been a problem thus far, but we're not without defenses.
That is good to hear. The next one is from Andrew. And Andrew wants to know that the Perkins School is in Boston. Are there any uses of this app or the technology in the app outside of Boston?
Yeah, so after our initial launch with Perkins in Boston, so we also have an Oakland office. Well, now that we've been acquired, we have many offices, but at the time we had a Boston office and an Oakland office. So we actually added support for the Oakland bus transit system into the app as well. So if you open the app in Oakland, it'll actually pop up like a transit authority chooser and say, hey, we noticed you switched to Oakland. That's oddly specific of you, but here you go. You can choose. We had some interest from some other transit authorities, and the system was built with multiple bus systems in mind. And it was definitely an interesting balancing act where, like, for example, some of the designs in the app are very specific to Boston MBTA. The shape of the bus signs, the shape of the bus in the little tutorial screen, some of the coloring is very Boston and Perkins focused. And the idea was the more interest we get, the more that could be opened up. So you can make the server understand about the different bus systems and send the appropriate images and things like that down to the app. There's also terminology. There's a really cool video that Apple put out, I think last year, about all the work that they do in their mapping app to cater to the individual needs of cities, including things like calling buses and trains and trolleys and trams the right thing, and like displaying the alphabetical letters on like the New York subway in the right order, because that's a thing that New York subway does, is the order is always deterministic. So that's the kind of thing that we would want to add if this developed more interest. I believe it's only live in Oakland right now, but it was designed with more cities in mind, and they could be added. And the source code is available, so you can go build it yourself.
That is really good to hear. The next one's from Ty. And I know that you showed us a little bit while you were doing the demo of the GPS signal, but he would like to know, given how much a lot of underground stuff happens with transportation systems, what kind of approaches did you consider? What kind of approaches did you implement in the app to deal with bad GPS locations?
Sure. So GPS is definitely kind of fickle. It's pretty good out in the open. It doesn't work as well in higher latitudes, check, with tall buildings, which is a problem here in downtown Boston. And I'm not sure to what degree weather affects it, but it can definitely be a little spotty. And so rather than try to hide that, like, you ever notice if you're driving and you take a wrong turn, your GPS will like stubbornly stay on the road because it kind of reveals to you how much they're projecting ahead, assuming that you're mostly taking the right turn and then only jumping off if they really know that you've taken a wrong turn. So we didn't want to do that because we wanted to be like more upfront about what you can trust about the data. So on the GPS signal thing, let me see what the exact wording is. So GPS accuracy is bad, GPS accuracy is fair. Apple gives you a number of meters of accuracy, and we sort of round that into buckets of like good, fair, bad, poor, something like that. So we help you understand how much you can trust the data. In terms of like what could be done to improve it, I think beacons are a big deal. I kind of wish that beacons were more integrated into location services. Like it would be really cool if you didn't have to say, ask the phone to go and get a GPS signal and tell you where it thinks it is, and ask the phone to go and find the nearby beacons. Look those up in a table, figure out where we think those are, and then kind of try to correlate the two and figure out which one we're going to trust. That's what it's like right now. And that works, and that's useful for sort of underground type situations. And as more train stations and bus stations add those, and also there, like digital signage, like you'll see TVs in bus stations and train stations showing ads. Those all have computers in them, and a lot of them have Bluetooth. And so that's something that we're investigating, looking into. Can we partner with those companies to take advantage of the hardware they already have in stations? And then do we need to place like, can they just be on the walls, or do they have to be on the turnstiles? Where do we need to place that stuff? But I think as more of that stuff becomes ubiquitous, it's going to be easier to sort of just generally ask the world, where am I? And take in all those sources and answer that question.
I'm pretty sure that some museums have become more beacon friendly. I see them often as some of the forerunners of integrating beacons for accessibility for a wide range of disabilities.
Sure. Yeah, indoor navigation is a surprisingly hard problem. It's kind of funny when you think about like GPS can tell you where you are on a planet, but then can't tell you whether you're in this room or that room of a house. Somebody asked about IMDF. I'm not familiar with IMDF. My Mac does not know what it is either. I'd love to hear more. I took a class when I was in college in the School of Spatial Engineering, and there were all these posters on the wall from people's like senior capstone projects of indoor navigation using bouncing Wi-Fi and reading codes on camera type codes on the walls, and like there's a whole bunch of things people are working on. It's surprisingly hard. I think it's probably mostly to do with like the scales, just that when you're dealing with GPS and worrying about the speed of light, you can detect what is it, like a foot is a nanosecond at the speed of light or something roughly like that. That you just need to be able to measure things faster when you're dealing with small distances, and at small distances also the noise is a lot greater. So if you've ever tried to calculate distance with Bluetooth beacons or Wi-Fi, so many things can interfere with it and the signal will just jump all over the place. So you can really only detect change in distance reliably rather than absolute distance. So you can tell I'm getting closer or further, but not how far away I am. So
I'm not muted. Okay. Someone wants to know whether or not you have the ability to use cameras to allow visually able coaches to bring advice into the person where in the lack of other situations.
Sure. So it's not in the app right now. It would not be that hard to add, and you may have seen. I'm trying to remember. I think there's an app called like Be My Eyes or something like that, where the idea is you sign up to use it, you make yourself available. It's kind of like Uber for sighted people. It's Uber for sighted people for blind people. So if you're a blind user, you want to know like what's written on this carton of food or whatever, you push a button, it goes and finds somebody who says, yes, I've got a few minutes to help, and then it streams the video to them and they can answer you. It would be super cool to integrate something like that into the app. It's hard to get that to scale because your audience of people who can help are whoever has downloaded the app and is still interested and is available. And I think there might be some asymmetries there in terms of supply and demand. But that's definitely the kind of thing that AI is getting more and more capable of solving. I mean, we have these phones now that are faster than our laptops and have special circuitry for running neural networks. And neural networks are really good at classifying things. Like they're not good at necessarily open-ended questions, but they're really good at figuring out, tell me when there's a bus stop sign in view. because you can teach it what a bus stop sign looks like. And I wish we had done this project this year instead of 3 years ago. I'd love to see it revisited with that kind of thing.
Totally understood. Here's a really good question from Samuel, which is, if you have people who are not visually impaired, how do you engage them and bring them to the app so that you can use them for crowdsourcing? How do you promote the app? How do you make people aware that this kind of crowdsourcing will touch somebody else's life?
So we were largely relying on a network effect, the idea that blind people could tell their friends and family, hey, grab this app. It'll be useful for you if you ever take the bus, just to check the times. And then while you're waiting for the bus, you can enter clues. And that helped a lot. We also had sort of contests in the office to get people to go and document. And people were, we had a leaderboard, and people were doing, hey, I did 20 stops, I did 22 stops. And then this guy took his daughter out in their car and documented like 200 stops in one day, and just rescaled the graph. And there was also some advertising. Let me see if I have a picture. Might be really easy to find. Yeah, here you go. Your desktop. So this was at the launch party, and you can see just off to the side here that Perkins and the MBTA did a sort of joint promotion thing. They actually had these giant Blindways banners on and inside buses, which was pretty cool. So for a couple weeks, we had some pretty high visibility in Boston. And I think we put up, let me see if it's still there, .org. I don't know how computers work.
We did .org, not org.
.org, yeah. The Zoom little thingy was covering the place where I was typing, but you can't see it. Here we go. So this was a map we put together. I haven't looked at it recently, so I don't know if it's still working. Software needs to be babied, or it will break all the time. Oh, here, show stops with clues. So here you can see the current state of the database. Blue are stops that have clues, and red are stops that need clues. And I don't have an easy way to query it to find out how, what the coverage percentage is, but this is way more filled in than last time I looked at it. You can see there's a bunch up here that hasn't really had much attention except that one spot. And there's like some weird little stretches in here, but we have a ton of coverage. And this is the kind of thing where the more people work on it and the more people talk about it, it can kind of grow. So there's some promotion, some relying on network effect.
Oh, I'm not muted. Okay. How did the business side of this work? Were you one of many vendors competing for this? Did you go and propose? How does a small consulting company get this kind of contract?
Sure. So I actually was not involved in the pitch part of this project, and actually I didn't even join it until the app was about halfway done. So some of this is sort of secondhand. And if you look at the talk that Erica is going to send out, post it in the chat, the academy.realm.io.
And I also put it in our school Slack. So
I think Chris in that chat, in that talk, talks a little bit more about it. Well, I hope this number is public. The Google.org grant was for $700,000, and the very large majority of that went towards this app. So like there's an idea for how much it costs to build an app with maybe a little more research than many apps would need. If it's e-commerce, it's more build list of things that you can pay for. So this is a simpler app, but with a lot more upfront research. So that gives you some idea of what something like that would cost at an agency like this. In terms of, I don't know what, for this project, whether there were other agencies in the running or exactly how the connection was made. But in general, we are very often up against a few other agencies. There are other agencies in Boston that do what we do, and there are other national or international agencies that do what we do. We often don't find out who they are, or we have to sort of infer and read the tea leaves, and our business development people sort of have their favorite theories about who we're up against, or we try to weasel it out of people if we get the deal, or if we don't get the deal, we try to find that out. But yeah, we're usually up against some other people. The process for sort of figuring out who to work with and how to work with them is often long. I think we just signed a deal that had a 9-month lead-in process of talking back and forth and signing things and negotiating things. But it's a combination of evaluating the business side of things, like what is the price. Our business development team has an acronym, I think it's BANT, and I'm not going to remember any of the things. Budget, maybe budget, authority, need, and timeline, I think. Those sound plausible. So do they have a budget? Is the person we're talking to in a position of authority to actually decide that they can pull the lever and they're going to work with us? Do they actually have a need for the thing that they're talking about? So that's the sort of strategy side. We look at it and say, well, what are you actually wanting to build? And why do you want to build that? And maybe could we use our expertise in mobile and tech to suggest maybe doing this other thing? And then timeline, what is that timeline like? We also often try to, as much as we can, as much as sort of money and timing allow, evaluate, like, is this something that we're really pumped to work on? Something that we think is really going to make a positive difference. So this was definitely high on that side of things, which was cool.
So we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to do something that we did a few weeks ago with Dave DeLong, and I think everybody who was here really loved doing it, which was open up the questions. Just raise your hands if you have one. Just ask questions about what it is to do the job, because most everybody here is studying to do the job. So if you've got a question about what it is day to day, just the nitty gritty of what it's like to be an iOS developer, go ahead and raise your hand. And
I will say, as a sort of blanket statement, I would defer to Dave DeLong on everything. So
I tend to do that too. But if you have a question, just there is a thing in Zoom which lets you raise a hand. It's near the yes, no, go slower, faster stuff.
Am I calling on people, or are you calling on people?
I'm trying to find anybody who has their hands up. It looks like everybody suddenly got shy.
I saw 2 participants raise their hands.
Oh, you did?
Paul and Jarek Warren.
Oh, let's go for Jarek. Okay, now I have to find Jarek and unmute him. Here we go. Unmute. You're unmuted, Jarek.
Hi, thanks so much for the lecture. I have a question about kind of data points. Like, when do you know that you're on target? And when do you know that you need to move on to like the next idea?
Do you mean in the process of developing an app, or between projects, or like what? Can you give an example of what you're referring to? You're muted again. Wait, I can.
Oh, I think he muted himself.
Oh.
But didn't realize that he can't unmute himself. Okay, Jarek?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, so let's about a project, saying that you have like a great idea to do something, but it's not going the way you want. Do you set like a time frame, 2-3 months, or do you just kind of say, you know what, let's go back to the drawing board?
Yeah. So in some respects, that's more of a business development question, and I'm very much on the engineering side of things. But I can tell you. And the apps that I've made on my own, like in my free time, are all stupid juggling apps, and I don't like. There is no I've gone too far. I need to go back to the drawing board. But in terms of how we structure our deals with our clients, I think that says a lot about sort of the expectations about success and metrics, that kind of thing. So we have 2 main ways of structuring projects with clients, and every project gets its own fine print and its own version of this, but the gist is we have fixed scope projects where the client has a budget and probably a timeline and says, we want you to build this thing. And then it's up to us to come in on time under budget, because if we need to go over, like if we decide this feature has to be in there, we need to throw more people at it, then that's on us. We have to eat that cost. So those are the ones that we tend to scope out those projects for things that are things that we've built before. They're like, oh, we did an amusement park app for this one company. This other company wants an amusement park app. We kind of know where the bodies are buried on that kind of project, and we sort of know what's involved. So those are the ones where things we think things are going to be more predictable. Then the other type of project would be more of a time and materials arrangement. We often call it an innovation team. And so this is more, they're paying for our people to be invested in the project for as long as they want to keep paying. It's, I think, usually sort of month to month. And the idea there is that there's no officially signed document that says, here's what the deliverable is. There might be things around what we're going to be working on, but it's not in the contract that we have to deliver a thing on a date. So they're really just paying for our time. And those are the ones where there's often more unknowns, and it's more research, R&D, prototyping. And so those are the two main structures of projects that we do. And which one we do really depends on the client and the type of project and how much experience we have in that. Because like one of the things that we bring to the table is that we've been doing this for 14 years, 15 years as this company. And a lot of the people here have been doing this longer at other companies before. And so we have a pretty good sense of what the predictability is and like what type of pitfalls we might run into, so we can help the client out a lot up front, sort of looking at their strategy and figuring out what problems there might be.
All right, next we have just Paul, and you are unmuted.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks for answering my questions earlier. Appreciate it. I was just wondering, how do you incorporate, I guess, like learning new concepts and whatnot as a developer, since you have to learn new things into your schedule? Do you just learn on the go as you need to do some research, or do you have like set time on the weekend, or I don't know, after work?
Yeah. So I'm lucky in that this is my job, but also my hobby. So I have a couple of apps and open source libraries that I maintain on my own. Yes, Erica, they are juggling related, some of them. And I made a stupid app that helps you learn how to talk backwards. And I say stupid app because it's like, it's not, I'm not trying to make money with them or anything, but I use them to learn new stuff. So in my little side project apps, I've learned how to do localization and some app architecture stuff and various types of, graphics things that I wouldn't have known how to do otherwise, and audio things. So that's one way that I do it. It doesn't work for everybody. Like, there are a lot of people who finish work for the day and don't want to go and write more code. And I don't have a good answer for people like that, because I'm not like that. Also, at our company, we have a thing we call Hack Day. And it's gotten harder to maintain as the company's gotten bigger, but especially when we were like between 20 and 40 people a few years ago, every other Friday, the whole company would stop and we would work on hack projects. And we've had some games and open source libraries that we've released that came out of Hack Day, and some internal process stuff and tools and things. And so Hack Day is a great time to work on things and learn new stuff. We have a gong that we ring whenever we like sign a deal. And on one of my first Hack Days here, I learned Scene Kit by making a tiny gong, which we can ring. Let's see. Oh, you can't hear it because it's plugged into QuickTime. Fun little Hack Day project. So that's another, and it's nice to work at a company that encourages that. That's one of our big sort of attraction points for bringing in talent and working with clients, is that we're not just working on the same stuff all the time. We get to work on new projects. This Blind Ways one was one of the biggest accessibility focused projects we worked on. So we learned a ton of new stuff, and we knew going in that we weren't going to know how to do everything, but that we have a lot of people who are passionate about learning new stuff and not getting frustrated when we don't know how to do something.
All right, we next have Frowin, and Frowin, you are unmuted.
Hi, I have two questions. Oh, well, maybe three, but
You're going to have to be slightly louder.
Oh, okay. Is this better?
Go ahead.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do day to day and how big your team is in your job? And then secondly, can you tell us, like, if you were to talk to your student self, what would you advise your student self now that you are a professional?
Oh, those are good questions.
Yeah, let me write those down so I remember them all. So size of the team, in about a year ago, when we right before we got acquired, we were about 70 people between Boston and Oakland, California. And that is iOS, Android, and web developers, designers, business development people, and I think the real heroes of the team, the product managers, who are the ones who sort of see the big picture and know what we're building and why. In terms of the individual projects, a project team is generally, we try not to have one developer per platform, sometimes on a smaller project. So usually it's between 2 and 4 developers per iOS, Android, and web, plus 1 or maybe 2 designers, and and a product manager. So that's, I don't know, the fingers didn't add up right, but anyway, that's roughly the size of our project teams. So you'll hear about companies that have 30 people just working on the storefront or something, and that makes sense for a big company that's all working on, like Wayfair, Amazon, or something like that. But yeah, we have pretty small teams, and the day-to-day. So we use some flavor of Agile Scrum, which is as much about setting the clients at ease as it is about tracking our own progress. Makes it really easy to sort of get a sense of how fast we're moving, and easy for clients to say, hey, our priorities have changed, surprise. And oh, okay, cool, we expected that, we can work with it. So we have a daily stand-up where we talk about what we're working on, and then it's whether it's writing a feature or fixing a bug, it's just doing one's best to block off enough time to actually load all the things you need to load into your brain to know what you're trying to do, and then trying to cram in a few typed lines of code before somebody comes and distracts you, and then repeat. And ask anybody I work with, I'm very distractible.
And what advice would you give your student self?
Yeah. I mean, it's probably going to be something about beware the advice of others. I think when a lot of people answer this question, they say sort of find your passion, follow your dreams. I've definitely given that answer before, but I think that answer runs afoul of the survivorship bias. This is where if you ask people who have succeeded at things what they should do, then they will tell you the stuff that they do, whether or not that was actually instrumental in their success. I mean, I'm pretty happy with where I've ended up in terms of the stuff I get to work with and the types of projects I get to work on. I mean, one of the decisions I made was I got into some pretty cool schools that were very expensive, and I would have had to take a lot of financial aid. And I decided that I didn't need a prestigious education. And so I went to the University of Maine, which had a cool new media program that looked interesting. And I made a lot of great friends, and I found my first job, which then led me to this job through that. So I wouldn't be here if I hadn't made those choices. But there are some industries and some people for whom a prestigious education and the connections you get through it are everything. So I can't say that that's the right choice for anybody but me.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, out of your week to prepare and everything to be here with us. And
sure.
I'm pretty sure that I can say for everybody how much we appreciate you doing. And I'm hoping that I can unmute everybody at once so everybody can express. Yep, everybody's unmuted.
Oh boy.
Thank you. Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me.
Thanks, Zev.
Thank you.
I'm on Twitter if anybody wants to get in touch or ask any follow-up questions. I'm also on Mastodon if you're into that sort of thing.